The first time my father called my mother useless, I was 8 years old, and I swore the world would one day hear the truth he tried to bury. This is our story of betrayal, silence and justice reclaimed. Stay with me. Subscribe now, and don't miss the moment the tables finally turn. The first time I saw my mother hit, the sound was sharper than winter wind against our windows. The kitchen seemed to hold its breath, the brittle crack, the quick gasp, the smell of scorched bread hanging in the air. Frost pressed white against the glass, yet inside the air was stifling. My mother steadied the plate before it slipped, tugging her sleeve down to hide bruises I already knew were there. My father stood over her in his boots, voice heavy with scorn, as if the house itself had failed him. I was 8. Old enough to understand, too small to intervene. My sister Lillian, 5, clung to the doorframe, whispering a question so faint I wasn't sure if it was sound or breath. My mother hushed her with a glance, love and fear twined together. The morning should have been ordinary oatmeal cooling, the radio humming. But nothing stayed ordinary when Gregory Hayes carried anger like a second skin. He cursed over toast, over bills, over the world that never bent for him. Then his hand struck, and the world tilted. I froze, staring past him toward the television. A female officer on the news lifted yellow tape with calm authority, her posture straight as stone. She looked untouchable, a figure of order against chaos. In her, I saw something my family had never known: strength that did not shout. I carved the image into memory, a seed of a vow still unspoken. My mother whispered, "It's fine," though nothing was fine. She had 100 excuses: clumsy steps, cupboard doors, bad luck. They fit her like threadbare coats. I clenched my fists, remembering the paper boat I had folded after a storm. I once told Lillian boats could become ships if you believed hard enough. I believed this one would not stay paper forever. Gregory sneered when my mother bent to the floor. Useless, he spat, harsher than the slap itself. Something broke free inside me. My voice shook, thin but defiant. Stop. The silence that followed felt louder than any strike. Gregory turned toward me, his eyes narrowing as though weighing whether a child deserved punishment. My legs trembled, yet I met his stare for one long second. My mother stepped quickly between us, hand pressed against his chest, her voice trembling as she pleaded. That night, she tucked us into bed, Lillian clutching her arm. The swelling on her cheek was faint, but undeniable. She kissed us and whispered, "When you're strong, don't become the thing that made you strong." The words sank deeper than the blanket around me, a warning and a guide. That night, under the covers, I whispered a promise into the dark. One day, I would be the one who says enough. By the time I turned 18, Gregory had traded his whiskey breath for cologne and a mistress. The change announced itself in small betrayals. Shirts pressed too carefully, ties brighter than his old work allowed, the sharp trace of perfume that didn't belong to my mother clinging to his collar. He came home humming as if he had discovered a new life, while the one inside our walls sagged under the weight of silence. At dinner, he set his phone down, face up, Cassandra Doyle glowing across the screen. He didn't bother to hide it. I tried to keep my focus on escape. A scholarship letter from the academy was tucked in my drawer, the paper creased from where I'd held it too often. Becoming a cop was more than a dream, it was armor, a way to turn my childhood vow into steel. Still, every time I saw my mother folding laundry with tired hands, whispering he was just working late, rage pressed hot in my chest. Lies had become her second language, and she wore them like sleeves pulled over bruises. Lillian, 15 now, had grown quiet. She chewed at her nails until they bled, glancing at the door each night as if waiting for the storm. One evening, she asked me if all marriages ended like ours. I told her no, but the crack in my voice betrayed me. The escalation came sharper that summer. Gregory swaggered through the kitchen, his shirt scented with Cassandra's perfume, and mocked my plans. "Don't think that badge will make you special," he sneered, jabbing at the roast chicken. My mother flinched, eyes flicking toward me with a plea to stay calm, but his words had already landed. Not long after, she found a folder tucked into his briefcase. A quitclaim deed transferring the house divorce papers half drafted. She showed them to me under the dim kitchen light, her fingers shaking. "He means to erase me," she whispered. I couldn't answer. Fury swelled but felt useless without form. I remembered the officer on the TV years ago lifting yellow tape with quiet authority. If strength could be silent, then so could justice. The humiliation turned public when Cassandra's voice spilled through his speakerphone during dinner. Sweet, syrupy, careless. "When will she sign, darling? I want us to start fresh." Dishwater dripped from my mother's hands as she froze by the sink. Gregory smirked as if her pain was entertainment. Lillian fled upstairs. I stayed staring at him across the table until my vision blurred. That night, he ended the charade. He tossed the divorce papers onto the table, the sound sharp as a gavel. "Sign it," he said coldly. "You're not needed anymore." The words hollowed the room. My mother's knees bent slightly, her breath catching. I clenched my fists, biting back the scream that rose in my throat. If I erupted, then he would win. Gregory leaned back, smug, convinced he had already claimed victory. He couldn't see the vow knitting itself together inside me, the same promise whispered years ago under blankets. This time it would not sink like paper in rain. It would be written in ink. That night, while the house slept, I opened my notebook. On the first page, I wrote one word in black ink: evidence. Cruelty needs an audience. Justice does not. I began where no one could see me. The kitchen clock ticked past 1 in the morning, its hands scratching out a rhythm against silence. Papers spread across the table, my notebook labeled evidence, a stack of receipts, a flash drive. My mother sat opposite, her shoulders slumped, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. I slid a medical release form toward her. She hesitated, reading the lines twice before signing with a shaking hand. "If this helps," she whispered. The pen left a trail that looked more like surrender than ink. Step by step, I moved carefully. At the hospital records office, fluorescent lights hummed above me as I presented her authorization. Intake forms appeared fractured, wrist-bruised ribs, accidental falls that had never been accidents. I requested certified copies stamped and logged, making sure the chain of custody was airtight. Later, in a cramped municipal office, I photocopied Gregory's LLC filings. The clerk barely looked up, but I checked the dates. His new company had been formed the same week Marjorie had shown up at urgent care. Hotel receipts lined up with transfers from their joint account to Cassandra's private one. The pattern was brutal in its simplicity. Her pain paid for Cassandra's perfume. At home, I organized everything into neat rows across the kitchen counter. Lillian drifted in, startled by the sight. A dish slipped from her hand and shattered. She clutched her chest, breath coming too fast. I guided her to a chair, pressing her palms flat against mine. "Breathe with me," I said. Slowly, her rhythm steadied. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. I met her eyes. "Because no one else will." She nodded, too young to carry that weight, but old enough to understand. The next step led me across the street to Mrs. Eleanor Watkins, our retired nurse neighbor. Her porch creaked as she opened the door, her silver hair pinned neatly, eyes sharp despite her age. She invited me in without questions. From a drawer, she produced a spiral notebook worn at the edges. I started writing things down, she explained. Inside were dates and notes, thuds shouting Sunday night crash, children crying. She flipped to one entry and tapped the line. This was the night she came to me with a cut above her eye. My throat tightened. When I asked if she would sign a sworn statement, she didn't hesitate. Someone has to tell the truth. Back at the house, proof gathered like storm clouds. Gregory and Cassandra remained careless. From the hallway, I overheard them on speakerphone. Cassandra's laugh rang out bright and sharp. "Once she signs, the deed is ours." Gregory chuckled, too sure of himself. I stayed still, recording every word. Her vanity was my gift. It gave me the missing piece. The quitclaim draft had a date set for the same week as the hearing. Later that night, Gregory left a voicemail on my mother's phone. His voice was thick with arrogance, the kind that believed itself untouchable. "You've had it easy long enough. Sign the papers or I'll put you on the curb." I saved it immediately, the timestamp glowing like a seal of fate. In my room, I laid the photos, the statements, the bank records, and now the audio in a single folder. Each page, each recording stitched into a case no one could ignore. For years, fear had been the heaviest thing in our house. Tonight, it wasn't fear I felt pressing on my chest. I sealed the folder and felt its weight. Not heavy like fear, heavy like certainty. If this journey has held your breath the way it held mine, subscribe now so you'll be with me when the gavel falls in the next chapter. Courts have their own weather. That morning, the air felt like a storm deciding where to break. The Cook County Courthouse smelled of polish and paper. Sunlight cut sharp beams across paneled walls, catching in the dust as though the air itself was on trial. The gallery murmured and hushed when Judge Whitaker entered, his robe trailing like a shadow. My collar was tight, my badge heavy. My mother sat beside me in her faded blue dress, hands trembling around a tissue that had already given up. Across the aisle, Gregory spread himself wide, cologne drowning out the memory of whiskey. Cassandra lounged next to him, a smile painted on like armor. Gregory played for the gallery. His voice carried just high enough. "She's always been useless." The word landed like a slap before his hand ever moved. My mother's pen shook over the page, and when she faltered, he leaned in, smirking. Then his hand flashed. The crack silenced everything. My mother flinched, her cheek reddening. A woman in the back gasped. The bailiff shifted. The judge's jaw hardened, but before his gavel fell, I was on my feet. I set my cap on the counsel table brim toward the bench, a silent gavel of my own. "Your Honor," I said evenly, "please check the last page." The clerk gathered the folder I had built line by line, night by night. Dated photographs, certified hospital records, police welfare call logs, bank transfers to Cassandra, the LLC paperwork, and at the bottom, a disk of recorded threats. Judge Whitaker flipped through each page, a strike of thunder Gregory hadn't prepared for. Cassandra sprang up, voice brittle. "This is absurd. Sit down, Ms. Doyle." The judge's command snapped through the air. She froze, color draining. He studied the documents. "These transfers coincide with documented injuries," he said, tapping the bank statements. "The LLC was formed just prior to a quitclaim draft." His mouth thinned. "Clerk, play the recording." The speaker hissed. Then Gregory's voice poured out, smug and oily. "Sign the papers or I'll put you on the curb." The words slithered into every corner of the courtroom. No one moved. Even the lights seemed to dim. My mother gripped the table. I held my gaze on the bench. "This isn't about winning," I said softly. "It's about truth." Gregory sputtered lies, fabrication, betrayal, but his words scattered. The judge lifted a hand and the storm calmed. "Enough." He set the papers down with finality. "These allegations are serious and corroborated. Mrs. Hayes, you will not sign anything today." His gaze shifted. "Mr. Hayes, you will be remanded pending further proceedings. A protective order is granted. A forensic accounting will follow." Gregory bolted upright, but the bailiff was quicker. Metal bit his wrists. The chain rattled like a verdict too heavy to ignore. Cassandra's composure cracked as the clerk logged the quitclaim draft into evidence. Her painted smile fell away. My mother's tissue disintegrated in her lap. I touched her back, steady, as the gallery exhaled a long-held breath. Gregory twisted once more, spitting. "You think I'm afraid of her." But the cuffs pulled tight, indifferent to bluster. Judge Whitaker spoke over him. "Court will recess. The order stands." His gavel struck a sound not of chaos but of resolution. I picked up my cap. It felt different now. Not a shield, but a name. Gregory shuffled past, his eyes darting for power he no longer owned. For years he had trusted silence to protect him. Now silence had betrayed him, each record and statement singing louder than his fist ever could. The cuffs clicked shut. For the first time, Gregory looked small, and the day felt far from over. When the courthouse doors swung shut behind us, the sky was the color of clean slate. The air carried a cool bite, the kind that makes you breathe deeper, as if the world itself insists you take in its freshness. For years, I had walked out of rooms with my shoulders hunched, expecting the storm to follow. But this time, the storm stayed behind us, locked in chains. Gregory was led toward the transport van, wrists cuffed, curses slurred and empty. For the first time, he looked diminished, less a force of nature, more a man unraveling under the weight of his own cruelty. Cassandra lingered near the steps, her perfume sharp as ever, but no one listened to her sputtered denials. When the bailiff turned, she slipped away, heels clicking like a retreat. The gallery that had whispered and stared during the hearing now murmured softer, some nodding toward us. Yet I kept my eyes on my mother. Marjorie clutched the protective order and the papers the judge had signed, custody of the house, restitution accounts divided fairly. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. In her grasp, those pages were scripture ink, binding a promise that she would never be voiceless again. Judge Whitaker's words lingered in me. Endurance should not be mistaken for consent. Today, endurance had blossomed into proof. We drove back in silence, Lillian leaning against the window, eyes red but wide open, as if she couldn't risk blinking and losing this fragile reality. At the curb, the house stood waiting, its siding weathered, its windows smudged by years of neglect. Yet stepping onto the porch felt different. No longer enemy ground, but reclaimed soil. Inside, the floorboards creaked the same. The dents in the doorframe caught the light as they always had. But instead of dread, I felt release. Marjorie reached out, brushing her fingers over one of the scars. For years, she had looked away from them. Now she smiled faintly, as though touching an old wound that had finally closed. Lillian whispered, "He can't hurt us anymore." We gathered at the kitchen table. The same table where plates had shattered, where bruises had been hidden beneath sleeves, where silence had carried the weight of survival. Marjorie laid the deed down carefully, the embossed seal catching the lamp's glow. She stared at it, then at us. "I won't be afraid anymore," she said. The firmness in her voice startled me, low, steady, entirely her own. Not borrowed strength, not whispered endurance. Her own. I reached for her hand. "You held us together. This paper is only proof." Her eyes filled not with tears of despair, but with something freer. Gratitude. Relief. The beginning of peace. That night, while Lillian brewed tea and Marjorie folded the protective order into a drawer, I stood in the doorway. The house felt lighter, as if it had exhaled along with us. I thought of the little girl who once whispered stop in a kitchen of broken plates. She had grown into the woman who said enough in a courtroom of silence. And that difference, the quietest victory of all, was ours. I carried silence like armor for years until I finally stood up and said enough. If my story speaks to you, tell me, leave a comment, share what courage has looked like in your own life, or simply write a word of support for my mother and me. Remember, endurance is not weakness, it is preparation. When your moment comes, do not shrink. Stand tall, steady your voice, and claim the justice you deserve.